Hi everybody, I'm here to show you how to set up your grid drawing in case you didn't take your grid drawing home with you or your grid painting home with you before we left school. So I'm going to break this up into different smaller videos in case you already have different parts finished. So this is the setting up of your grid artwork. We're calling it artwork because you can paint it, you can draw it, you can color it with color pencil, crayons, oil pastels, whatever you need to use. So ideally what you would have is an image. I have this image that I'm going to work with today that is printed from my printer. If you don't have a printer, that's okay. Maybe you have an old book that you don't mind taking a picture from like we did at school, or maybe you have a photograph. This is a photograph that another student of mine has of her father, and it could be any photograph, but we are going to draw a grid over the top of it, so keep that in mind. It would be a picture that you don't mind ruining. So it can also be like a magazine picture. It can be really any kind of picture. Ideally, it has it's a high resolution picture. You don't want something that's really pixelated. You don't want an image that's blurry, and you don't want one that's too small. So something that you can really see. That will make this project really successful. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do is take your image and we're going to draw a grid over it. Okay, I know that not everybody has a ruler. This is the most ideal tool to use. I have this ruler, this clear ruler. Hopefully you have a ruler in your house. If you don't have a ruler, I'm thinking just get creative. Maybe take a Post-it note. A Post-it note is typically 3 inches or 2.5 inches. This one is 3 inches. So you could use that as a standard. You need to just have some sort of standard measurement, okay? If you just wing it and draw lines over it, it's not gonna come out. So it has to be a standard measurement. So take your ruler and put the end of the ruler on the end of the image. So you don't want to just like start at the end of the ruler, because in the case of my ruler, which I guess you can't see because it is clear, there's the end of the ruler, but there's also the one starts here. So you really have to put it on the one and on the edge of your paper. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to mark every 1 inch with my pencil, just like you see here. Okay, so I've marked one edge. Maybe I need to like slide it over a little so you can see it. Now I'm going to move my ruler up and mark the same edge just like that. What would happen if I flip the image over instead of moving my ruler up? What do you think would happen? What do you think would happen? Well, unless your image is exactly 8 inches or 7 inches or whatever it is, you're going to have a little bit left over. In my case, as you can see, I have a little bit here. It's like 1/8 of an inch right here that is left over. If I mark one edge of my paper and then just flip it over and start over here, it means that it's going to be on a diagonal. And you don't want that because it's just not going to make your squares perfectly perpendicular to each other. So I've marked the top and the bottom. Now I'm going to do the 2 edges, and I'm going to start on the edge of my image, mark every inch with my pencil. You could also do this with a pen. Keep in mind, if you do this wrong, it's going to be really difficult to erase the lines. So I really encourage you to pay attention and do it the right way, so that you don't have to erase anything or get a different picture. Okay, so at the moment I have all 4 sides of my image has a little mark that has a 1 inch mark, as you can see. Now I'm going to take my ruler and carefully match up the dots that I drew. Believe it or not, I've been teaching this assignment for like 22 years, there's always people who make the marks and then just like wing it. Or they put marks on one edge and then they try to like make it perfect by not marking the other edge. That's not, it's not very often that the squares are perfect. So I would highly encourage you to do it the correct way. So just to measure it, every edge of it, and match up each of the dots. Okay, moving right along, I'm going to flip my paper. So I have the vertical line, or the horizontal lines. Now I'm going to do the vertical lines. Okay, so like I said, I've done a 1-inch grid over the top of my image. Okay, I have a perfect 1-inch grid drawn over the top of my image. Okay, you can kind of see that. Now I'm gonna number and letter it. Doesn't really matter which way you do it, but I'm gonna number it across. So it's 8 inches across, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, perfect. As I suspected, my image is, it's 8 by 8, so it's a square. So my paper also is eventually going to be square, or at least the image that I draw on it is going to be square. So the next step is to draw the same grid on your paper. Okay, if you're using paper, if you're using canvas, you can also draw a grid over your canvas. Trying to think if there's something else that you can use. You could also do this on the computer if you can draw a grid if you're doing it digitally, because that's your only medium that you have at home. Then you can draw a grid over your original image, and then you can, in Photoshop or whatever tool you're using, you can also make a grid and then copy each little square. So that's the point of this. It's practice in seeing. It's a good lesson in math. It's a good math lesson, and it's also helps us. Well, the original reason I was going to teach this is because it's going to help us practice really seeing the colors. So, for example, this is, like I said, this is one of my students' artwork that I teach from home. They don't go to LaGuardia, but this is an image of her dad. This is the canvas. We primed the canvas first with a blue color just to have it, just to have a ground layer on it, because you don't want to have a lot of like, you don't ever want to like hold your canvas up to the light and see light coming through your canvas. You really want to have all parts of your canvas covered. So we covered it. Also, this in her image, it's very dark, so we covered it with this blue, and then I don't know if you can see it, but you can see, maybe if I get close, you can see that we've drawn a grid over the top of it. Okay, so then ideally you're gonna then take your viewfinder. We used a Post-it note, but you can use really anything, and you're gonna copy each square by square. So as you can imagine, it could end up really photorealistic, because if you're in this one, which is like E4, you're gonna find E4, which is here, and she hasn't done that square yet. She actually started by drawing like a very light drawing with paint, and then we're going back and filling. So I would say that this square here is pretty well, it's not completely finished. She's probably gonna have to go back, but as you can see, if she's looking at this square of her dad's eye and his glasses, sit a little closer to you so you can see it. This is my first time making a video like this, so sorry. As you can see, she's just focusing what's in that square. So it makes it a little less overwhelming, because you're making each little square is its own little painting, and it's really easier to focus on the color and all of that. So she's really looking and seeing like, okay, this flesh is maybe a little more peachy than this other part of the flesh. This part of his eye might be a little bit bluer. There's some purple in the shadow of his eye. And so she's really focusing on the color. And originally, that's what I wanted you guys to do. She's using acrylic paint, which in some ways is harder, in some ways it's easier. So if you brought the tempera paint home, or you have tempera paint, or you have acrylic paint, if you have any paints, I would prefer that you did this project in paint. If you don't have any paint, it's totally fine. You could still do this in color pencil. You could layer the color pencil to get the correct colors. And if you really don't have any, you could do it with oil pastels as well. But if you really don't have any color material, you're welcome to also do this project using pencil. So an example of that would be this one that's been started. So as you can see, it's just a black and white drawing, and they're using pencil, but they're literally copying each square by square, and they're paying attention. If it's very light, they're making it very light. If it's super dark, they're making it really dark. So this project is really important to focus on the value. So the lightness or darkness of the values in the image, okay? So next, back to setting up the picture. So I'm looking at my picture, and right now it's 8 by 8. I could make it 8 by 8 if I want, and make it exactly the same size. That would in some ways be fairly easy. Personally, I think it's nice to have like a larger artwork, and sometimes, you know, to get like those little details and draw those little details or paint those little details, I think personally it feels a little bit harder to me. So I work better if I can make it a little bit larger. So it's up to you. You can, I'll show you how to make this the exact same size, because I think a lot of you have already done that. So I'm gonna put my ruler on the edge of the paper, and this paper, since it is pre-cut, is it's a 12 inches by 18 inches. So I'm just gonna mark every inch, as you can see, mark every inch here, and I'm gonna mark every inch around the paper. So I'm gonna actually do most of the drawing on this edge of the paper. So I'm again just gonna put the edge of the ruler, well, I'll show you this way. So I'm putting the 0 on the edge of the paper, as you can see, and I'm gonna mark every 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. I would recommend keeping the paper the size that it is, and when you are finished with it, then you can trim off the extra edges that you don't want, okay? So, all right, I'm making this 12 by 12. I'm not sure why. Oh, because maybe I'm doing it because I kind of want a border. All right, so then here I'm also gonna mark every inch of this paper. So depending on what medium you're using, you're gonna wanna draw, you might wanna draw light lines. So for example, if you plan on using watercolor for this, actually as I'm talking to you, I'm gonna just match up the lines here. If you're using acrylic paints, I think you can really draw your lines as dark as you need to, because the acrylic paint is gonna cover the pencil line. If you're using tempera, when you have lighter colors like yellow or something that's white, if it's white, I would actually like you to use white paint, if you have it, to paint the paper, not just leave the color of the paper. Tempera, I would still lighten it a lot if you're using tempera, and if you're using watercolor, I would lighten it so much that you can barely see the lines, but like you can still use it as a guide, okay? So as you can see, I'm drawing here my, I'm drawing the paper that I'm gonna actually make the art on, okay? As you're picking your image, I want to remind you that I would prefer you didn't use somebody else's art. So don't print off somebody's art from Instagram. Don't print off, you know, for this project, I'd rather you didn't print off something from another artist, like no anime or cartoons or anything like that. I would like you to, ideally, you could print a picture that you've taken. That would be awesome. Or it can be a picture from the internet or from a magazine. Obviously, that's other people's art because it's like their photograph, right? And photography is an art, but it feels a little different to me than if you're copying like painting to painting. That was your homework last week, is to copy your favorite artist. For this project, the grid artwork, I would like you to choose your own image is ideal. If you don't have anything and you're like, the only thing I have is this, I don't know, this book, this art history book that I'm gonna rip a page out of, if that's your only option, then I would rather you used that. If you're like, the only option you have is something from like Time Out magazine or a newspaper, if that's the only thing you have, then you should use that. So I would rather you use an image that's not ideal than to just forego this project. So I want you to figure out, be creative with how you can do it. Okay, so as you can see, I have my the paper here that I've drawn the 1-inch grid on, and then I have my image that I've drawn the 1-inch grid over. So this is 8 by 8, this is 12 by 12. If it's very confusing for you, you are welcome to just number and letter across A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then that's gonna be your grid. If you can figure it out, like for me, I think I'm gonna try to, I'm actually gonna start in the middle, and if there's 12 here and there's 8, I'm gonna leave a little space in the top. I'm gonna write my numbers and letters going across this way. So for me, I'm just gonna label it like this. And then this is gonna start going from this way. So as you can see, my image is gonna be exactly in this little space right here. So my image is gonna be in this space, okay? Within this. And then when it's all finished, then I can like leave a 1-inch border if I want, erase this part, and then cut the paper. But while I'm working on it, I kind of like to have extra paper so I can hold it and work on it and like not, you know, smudge it or smear it or anything like that. So this is set up. The next part of the setup is to make a viewfinder. I'm actually going to show this in the next video as well. So I've already made the viewfinder. I used a Post-it note and I measured with the ruler and cut out a perfect 1-inch square. So how did I do that? I took the ruler, I measured across like this. I drew a, I don't have any extra Post-its, or I would show you how to do this. But anyway, I took it, it's exactly 3 inches. I marked the 1 and the 2. I did it down here as well. I marked the 1 and the 2. I drew lines across like this, and then I did it on the opposite way too. And then I took an X-Acto knife and cut it out. If you don't have an X-Acto knife, a pair of scissors works just fine. So cut this out. This is going to be really important. As you can see, I can then look in here. I can put this on this little square right here, which is 4E. Oh, sorry, I need my glasses. I can't even see. I'm showing you the wrong way because I can't see. Okay, this little shape right here, this is 4E. And as you can see, this is 4E right here. And if you want, you can start by like lightly sketching out the image, okay? Sometimes it helps me to put a mark off the halfway point on this little viewfinder so that I can see, oh, this shape, you know, let me put it up closer. So I put, so as you can see, I marked the halfway point on all these places so I can see like, oh, this shape right here there's a tiny bit of white in this corner, and this only goes halfway down the square. So when I'm drawing it in here, and I'm just looking at that little tiny space, I can see like, oh, there's a little space here like this, and if this is the halfway point, this shape starts here. Can you guys see this? I wish oh, can I make it? All right, when I do the other part, I'm gonna scroll in so that you can see. So as you can see, it kind of like goes up and then it goes down to the halfway point here. It starts around here, it curves out, and you can go back and make adjustments as needed, you know? So I'm going to stop the video here, and this, so far, this is the setup part. So if you did this at school, awesome. If you want to do a second one because you're bored and you want to set up your own grid drawing, or maybe at school you started one on paper with tempera, but you happen to have materials at home and you want to try making one on a canvas, you're welcome to try that. You know, just so that you know though, you can also make it larger. So for example, we used a 1-inch grid. You know, this is a 1-inch grid, as you can see. And here we made it, I don't know how big this is. These are 2-inch. So we measured it and we drew a 2-inch grid on the canvas. So, because this is going to be exactly twice as big as this image, okay? So, yeah, set it up, do whatever you can. Another little trick, especially if you don't have a ruler, is to use a piece of graph paper. You can glue or tape your image to graph paper. I have 2 sizes of graph paper here myself. So this is a 1-inch graph paper. This is a, I don't know, 1/2-inch graph paper. I don't know what this is, but you can always glue or tape your image to the graph paper, and then you just draw the lines over the top of your image. Then you don't have to do all the measuring. That's if you have graph paper. I wouldn't do the drawing then on the graph paper because like you can't erase the graph. And it's also, this is done on printer paper. So, I mean this actually this paper's not so bad. But yeah, do what you can do. I know that we are scrambling to get it all done, right? So for example, if you wanted to make your image bigger, this wouldn't even be big enough paper to accommodate my image unless I cropped it. So I made this paper a 2-inch grid. So I could theoretically make my image twice as big. So how would you do that? Like how would you recommend I fit this image on this paper? I know the answer. Do you know the answer? So, okay, hopefully you've thought about it for a second. So this image is 8 squares by 8 squares, right? This paper that I've drawn it on is actually, since it's twice as 2-inch squares, it is 6 squares by 9 squares. So how can I make this image fit there? You're right, I could crop my image. Okay, so if I wanted to keep the people in it and I wanted to crop off this side, which, I mean, I wouldn't want to do that because I love how it's all crammed into one side of it. I like that kind of asymmetry. But I could just make it 6 squares across. So I could chop off those 2 and I could make it fit in the 6 inches across and the 8 inches down. So basically my image would fill up this much space, and but it would also look, in the end, it would look like this instead of like this whole square. So if you want to crop your image, go for it. If you want to make it larger, go for it. If you want to do it on a canvas, go for it. If you want to do it, if you don't, like I know I have like 12 by 18 paper. I don't expect you to have 12 by 18 paper. If you have to, you know, do your image on a piece of printer paper, that's what you have to do. You know, it's not the end of the world. Um, we'll go back to school eventually, and I'm looking forward to it. So, all right. So this portion of the video is done. The grid setup. The next video is going to be actually starting the work on your grid. So see you in a minute. Bye bye.